Welcome back to Live With, brought to you by Species Nutrition. Visit speciesnutrition.com. I'm Dave Palumbo, and we're back by popular demand for part 3 of the Arne List, Ed Connors series of interviews that we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks. And I want to welcome Ed and Arne back to the show.
Hey, Dave.
We got Ed. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
I want to just thank you guys for coming back again. I know we have a lot more to talk about. Arne, I don't think we're ever going to get to all the new stuff you're doing, but let's. People seem to love the old stuff. They love the old stuff. And I know you wanted to make a few clarifications. We're not going to get
to it. Yeah, we won't get to it today, but we will get to it.
Yeah. What did you want to clarify? I know there's a lot of comments in the under the interview section.
Yeah. So there's a few things. You know, I didn't read the comments below the first interview until just a couple of days ago. You know, and there are some questions that I wanted to clarify with folks. The first one is that with my involvement with Craig, I never did anything illegal with Craig.
Craig Titus, you're talking about. You're talking about Craig Titus.
I never. We didn't have that kind of relationship. I was not involved in selling anything illegal with Craig at all. And had I been involved with him, I probably wouldn't have expected my money back. It would have been a bad business fit, I guess you could say, right? But so I never had anything to do with Craig in some of the stuff that he was doing.
You know, and a lot of people ask you, why did Craig call you when he got arrested to get bail money out of you?
Well, because he knew I had money.
Oh.
That's the first and most obvious reason. I had, you know, like I said, Etsy and I had the clothing line, and Craig was wearing our clothes and stuff.
Okay, all right.
You know, we were paying him, you know, to some degree, and then, you know, he knew I had money, so, you know, if you're going to ask somebody to bail you out, you want to make sure they can actually write a check.
I'm surprised, Ed, that Craig didn't call you.
Well, that's an interesting. I don't want to hog this conversation like I did last time because Arne dropped off, but I was going to say that that's the one thing he said in his first interview that I really related to, because I in the beginning I bailed out a number of people, and after a while one of them said, Ed, you know, I don't do that again. I need to get to the bottom before I can get up again. So after that, I never bailed anyone out.
Did Craig call you when he got arrested that first time?
I don't remember.
Oh,
no.
Really?
Well, you only get one phone call, bro.
Okay.
So he called you. Okay, I got it.
I was the lucky guy. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So listen, if you have one arrow to shoot, right, you want to make sure it hits the bullseye.
That's true.
Craig knew I had money.
Right.
He knew I was. I'm an emotional person, so when somebody asks me for help and I'm able to give them help, I will give them help. But sometimes those lessons that we learn are the ones that cost us the most money, or they're the most emotionally painful. Either or sometimes a combination of both.
Right. Well, $5,000, it could have been worse. Could have been 50,000 you lost, right? Craig could have skipped bail or something like that.
Totally, 100%, 100%. So that's the first thing, and that's part of. And along those lines, I sent you the that was a recommendation letter I sent you from the U.S. Attorney in Miami, and I did. I'm not mincing words. I did a plea bargain with them, and I am not ashamed to say it.
You cooperated too, though. Admittedly,
I cooperated, and here's why I cooperated. The last time I told this story, I didn't really tell a good portion of it. When I had my drug wholesaler's license in Vermont, the person that I was shipping the merchandise to in Florida asked me if I could get him a copy of my license and a set of the keys to my facility in Vermont. And when I asked him why, he said he needed a paper trail of where the medications, all the licenses the medications were going through, which made sense. And he was going to set up a surveillance camera system up at the facility in Vermont. All made sense. So we're going to have. I assumed we were doing everything with what I thought we were doing. Is we're going to create a legitimate business, and that's what he had.
Right, but Arne, weren't you getting the growth hormone kits from like the AIDS patients?
And that was the part that was not legitimate.
Of course not. Yeah. We all know that as bodybuilders what was going on. So you try to legitimize an illegitimate business.
Dave, just so you understand, that Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So that originally started with what I told you at the different gyms, but there ended up being, after a certain amount of time, certain pharmacies that I could go to that would give me this stuff.
I'm sure you were probably giving them a great deal. They didn't want to pay the full price.
No, they were selling it back to me.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Did they wind up getting in trouble, those pharmacies?
So there were pharmacies that were working both. They were giving it to the patients. The patients would bring it back and sell it to them, and then I would go and buy it from them.
Right, yeah, that was illegal, though.
So there was a whole bunch
I know,
of
because I
different
was
ways.
involved in that, too. It was illegal. That's why I went to jail, too.
Yeah, but that's the main thing. You know, that's the reason I gave you that letter.
Right.
That's what I wanted to clarify, is that it was very obvious to me that there were cameras that were never set up. The other thing that really came home to me with the simvastatin thing is that when somebody tells you your license is connected to $50 million of counterfeit Lipitor, and how that's happening, the Lipitor is being bought in the U.S., sent to South America, remanufactured and grind and diluted to 10% of what it's supposed to be, and then re-imported back into the country, where now you have people who need a actual legitimate medication, and they're taking something that's at 10% potency is what they think.
So that guy was doing that with your license? Is that what was happening?
Yeah.
Okay. So you figured, well, you know, it's true. So, he was messing with my license, so I'll out him.
But
that makes sense.
It wasn't just that, Dave. It's that, here's the thing. When a person like myself or anybody else gets involved in selling any kind of substance that's not legal, I don't care what it is, be heroin, growth hormone, it don't matter what it is. You have now stepped into I don't even want to say industry, but you've stepped into a business that is so much bigger than you can possibly imagine. And for me, that was a real eye-opener, because there were people who needed medication, had heart conditions and all this stuff. You're literally putting people's lives at risk. And if somebody's taking a medication that's not the strength that they think it is, or it's stronger than what it can kill them.
Yeah,
it can kill them.
Arne, you might have been doing people a favor, though, ironically, because Lipitor has kind of...
You're right, Ed.
No, Lipitor, they call it the memory loss drug, right?
Yeah.
So by taking a watered-down version, God knows, maybe you saved some lives.
Maybe.
You're right,
but
Ed.
now I'm starting to wonder if maybe I ever used Lipitor, because half of the stuff in my life before 30, I don't remember.
But David, Arne, one question. GH wasn't a controlled substance, though, back then.
But it's called, you know what, Ed, it was considered fraud. I'm sure that's what happened to Arne, too. Right?
Yeah, there was multiple things that I was.
Fraud is worse than selling GH, Ed, by the way. You're better off getting caught selling. Actually, you're better off getting caught selling steroids. Fraud is way worse, because fraud is in the same category as defrauding an old lady out of her pension. You know, so they don't. The judges don't like that. They don't take kindly to fraud.
But actually my thing, and I don't know when that changed, Ed, the controlled substance or not. But what they charged me with was conspiracy to distribute a controlled substance without a license, without the proper.
But what Ed
license.
is saying, it wasn't a controlled substance.
Must have been in somewhere, because that's what I went to jail for.
Yeah. That's what you plea bargained to. That's what you plea bargained to, though. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I was wiring money across state lines, so there was, there was a bunch of things.
Yeah.
You know, that's what it's like. You know, when they have somebody, it is what it is. Yeah. You know, but I just wanted to be very clear. I never had I didn't do any business at all with Craig ever, with any kind of stuff. Only the clothing.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that was the first thing, and then the other thing too that I sent you, and this is going to give you a little bit of a forecast of where we're going. I sent you a copy of a Christmas letter from 2013 that I had written Will Smith and his oldest son Trey.
Yeah.
You know, that letter, I don't know how much of that you read, but now it's 2013. A lot of stuff in my life had happened, this and that. But that letter was about how much Will encouraged me with my screenplay, and how much I was grateful for that.
Well, I don't think people even know anything about your screenplay. Arne wrote a screenplay while he was in prison. I think you mentioned that while you were in there for 30 days. Or I don't know if we talked so much. I don't know if you mentioned it on the TV show, or if you mentioned it to me when we were just talking.
No, I didn't.
And you wrote a screenplay that you're trying to get made into a movie. And there's a lot of meaningful coincidences and people that you've met along the way that I think we're going to spend another interview time on, going over that whole
oh, for sure,
series of events that led up to
100%.
Where you are now.
100%. 100%. And one of the things is that encouragement is the type of encouragement that Ed always gave to people. It's like, it didn't have to be anything, you know, long term, or was there, but there was enough encouragement there for a kid from back east, you know, whether it was, I mean, one of the first comments I saw was Jay Cutler. You know, I rolled in Jay, and Jay was, you know, from New England or up that way, and I first met Jay at Gold, but I did a photo shoot. We were doing a photo shoot, not the same photo shoot, but at Weider with Robert Reif. Mm-hmm. And he was doing one and I was doing the other. And that was early on. I mean, that was probably 92 or something like that.
Ed, back in the 90s, what was the pipeline? How did you find out about it? There was no internet. How did you find out about all these new talents? Because you always had the newest guys coming out to stay with you, doing photo shoots out there. How would you find these people?
Back then, the Gold's Gym franchises were actually holding bodybuilding contests. And a lot of them had what they would call a Gold's Classic.
Right.
And so I think Jay Cutler, and I know Paul DeMeo, who knows, I think they all won the local area gym classic. And then as part of that, they would come out to, the owners would call me up and say, Ed, so-and-so's coming out, can you get him a photo shoot? And then I would do whatever I could.
Interesting. Okay. So that's how you discovered a lot of talent?
Well, and that's why I brought a lot of bodybuilders over from Europe, because my gyms would put on these bodybuilding contests and need guest posers, and back then that could be a draw to help sell tickets.
Sure.
And you know, it's a whole other way of promoting gyms that doesn't exist these days, because you would get your poster promoting your gym and the competitors' gyms by holding a bodybuilding contest. And you know, I brought Barry DeMay over for the guest pose at one of the gyms, and you know, he ended up staying, and his brother followed. So again, it was something that doesn't exist now.
Did you ever meet Diana Dennis, Ed?
Oh yeah, I loved her. She was great.
So she was the lady who.
If a lot of the male bodybuilders had more of the personalities of the female bodybuilders, they'd go farther.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Diana came to Vermont and did a guest posing at one of the state shows, and that's how I met her there. Nice lady.
She was wonderful. Debbie Crook was another one. Of course, Corey Everson was one of my first house guests.
Which is funny, yeah.
Well, here this is funny because in 1984, when I was 19, remember I told you I went to the Nationals the first time as a natural guy and this and that. Well, I went backstage, and the men's was over, and now the women were going on. And I'm standing there talking to Wayne, and he points at this lady. I didn't know any of the really female bodybuilders at all. And he points to this lady, and he says, this one right here is going to put the whole bodybuilding thing on its head. Watch. And I said, oh, really? Who is it? He goes, it's Corey Everson. I go, oh, who's that? He goes, you don't need to know. He says, you want to oil her up? And I said, right? I'm like, really? He goes, yeah. So he go ahead. So I oiled up her back and everything. She went out, and the rest is history. You know, she won the whole thing. That's and just her whole. But I don't remember seeing her at Gold's. But a lot of folks there. You know, Sharon Bruneau, I did a cover of Muscle and Fitness with. Tanya Knight. Everybody. I mean, I worked from 5 in the morning to 10. So any bodybuilder that was in L.A. that trained in the morning, I had to see him.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Corey and Jeff moved out of Venice quickly, because he got a job as editor of Muscle and Fitness, so that they moved to the Valley right away.
Yep.
And even back then, you know, it's 17 miles north of Venice, and you know, it's a hike, and you know, impossible nowadays. I would go to Chicago more times a year than I would go to the Valley in LA.
Yeah, it is funny. People from Venice or the West Side, they don't really go to the Valley much. And vice versa. If you live downtown, you stay there. If you're south of the airport, you don't come north of the airport. It's kind of territorial. I guess it's from the traffic to some degree, but probably other
people don't realize. I mean, LA is quite a collection of municipalities, and you know, many of them are independent cities, Santa Monica or Beverly Hills. That was, you know, getting people back to you were dealing with the LA police, not the Santa Monica police, because Venice is not an incorporated city. It was part of LA and still is.
You know, speaking of Diana Dennis, Diana Dennis was one of the best probably posers that I've ever seen on stage. She was just phenomenal. Body control and just her performances. And it's funny, she got into photography, and toward the end of my career, she was shooting photography. She wanted to shoot me, and she lives in Vegas, and I went to her house, and she had a bathtub in the middle of her like kitchen. I did photos. She shot photos in her bathtub in the kitchen of me. It's pretty funny. You know, she's just a very creative person. You know, she had a lot. I think she had a lot more to contribute to the sport than she obviously could have. That could have increased the marketability in terms of like entertainment value of the sport.
Yeah, you know, that's the thing. You touch on something right now. I think most bodybuilders, it's been my experience, have a lot more that they could contribute as far as in life in general. Yeah. And they put their focus in this self. I did it myself for a long time, and I didn't really realize what I was doing until I wasn't doing it anymore. I got off of everything. I was putting all my. It was very self-serving. You know what I mean? It was only what I wanted. I was doing what Arne wanted instead of really. I mean, there's only one way to put it: is I'm about doing God's will, not my own will anymore. And since I've made that transition, my life is totally different.
It takes a lot. It takes a lot to, you know, you have to get out of that egotistical mindset. But I think, you know, to be a successful bodybuilder, Ed, you could tell me if I'm right or wrong here. I think you almost have to be in that selfish, self-centered type of universe, because if you're not, you can't focus in on like a laser on what you want. Dorian said it best. He barely talked to his family when he would get ready for a show. I mean, because he just couldn't. He couldn't emotionally give over that energy. He had to devote all that energy to being the best bodybuilder in the world.
You need to find a balance, hopefully. I mean, Jim Quinn once said to me, "Ed, you work too hard," and I said, "Well, you train too hard." Where's the balance in life? I remember, I don't want to embarrass Mike Francois too much right now, but I remember his brother or mother, one of his parents, calling me and asking me to try and get Matt to go to his brother's wedding in Iowa, but it was 10 weeks out from the Arnold, and Mike didn't want to go. And to me, that's, I mean, I hate to embarrass him now, but that's crazy. There's no balance in your life if you can't. I mean, you know, you're not launching a rocket to the moon. I mean, yes, and that's the other. You know, I don't understand that mentality. I mean, but again, I've never been a competitive athlete, and I was totally focused on my work, but I still had a life. I have very few regrets.
You know, as a former competitor, it's when you're in that mode, in that mindset, you feel so crappy that all you want to do is devote every ounce of energy you have to go into the gym, doing your cardio, preparing your foods, neurotically organizing, and just resting. Anything that requires any outside energy or focus, it seems like it will drain the life out of you almost. And I don't know why it is, and I don't know why we can't find a focus or a balance in that sense, but that's how I felt. When I would get ready for a show, I didn't want any distractions. Now, the only time I would allow a distraction into my life is if I thought it would help, you know, propel my whatever I was trying to achieve. Like a lot of times I would get auditions for commercials in New York City, and I'd have to hop on the Long Island Railroad, and I was dieting for a show, and I had my food with me, and I'm like, you know what? This could be a big opportunity. I can't give it up. I can't miss this. So I would go in and do stuff like that. But other than that, I hated anything that would deviate me from my ritualistic, you know, daily routines.
Yeah, I think bodybuilders are very much that lifestyle is very much about consistency and regimentation. You know, you basically do the same thing day after day after day. That's why you're compounding your daily routine, and you're building these different results time and time again. And I think with anything that you're doing, any endeavor, whether it's a professional athlete, you see it with like Kobe and these different folks that you know, they say they're obsessed and all this. It takes an obsession. It does take an obsession to be successful at a super high level in business, in sports, in a lot of different things. It's that level of, you're willing to do that to get there. So with bodybuilding, because you compound it with different things that you're willing to take and you're willing to do, because they're part of what you need to, if you want to get there, you got to do this. If you don't want to do this, you're not going to get there. It's just like if you talk to any super successful business person, it's, these people that are worth billions of dollars, they will tell you that there are certain principles and daily things that you have to do or you will not get to where you're trying to get. And bodybuilding is the same thing. And the drugs or performance enhancement that people call it nowadays, that is one of those things. And so if you're not willing to do that, you don't have a prayer of getting to the level that you want to get to, and you better find some other avenue in the sport if this is what you want to do that you can, get into, whether it's promoting, judging, business, whatever, because you're not going to get from the natural kid in Vermont to whatever level he achieved without doing all the stuff in between. And that's the thing where in sports in general, the level of competition, it gets more and more and more and more every year. If you look at the NFL, the athletes, it's more violent, and that's only because the players are faster and they're bigger. That means it's a bigger collision. So it's really about, in the U.S. for sure, we want to see the extreme. That's just the way it is. We want to see the ball thrown the fastest runner, the biggest guy, the strongest man, the biggest freaky bodybuilder. And for me, that was, I could see that early on in 1987 when I lost to Vinnie Comerford. I placed 5th and he was 1st. And because they had both him and I for like 15 minutes, just the two of us. So we thought it was him or me. But then when he placed 5th, and I asked Wayne what happened, he goes, well, they wanted to put everybody who was a bigger body type towards his placement. And that's when I could really see, okay, it's going to go that way. But that was in 1987, but look at where it is now. And that's, unless I'm missing something major, that's strictly from the stuff that people are taking.
Well, Arne, given all that you said, that's why I would tell almost everyone I can remember talking to, give it 3 years, and then if you're not, where you want to be, where it makes sense, quit, or go on, just move on.
Yeah, I gave it.
Ed was a big.
I gave it 30 years.
And you think guys eat too much food too, right? You think the guys got too big. I think that was one of the things you've said before.
They're getting obsessed. All these food pics and eight times a day, and people would say, "Oh, Ed, you're not." They're just telling you what they think you want to hear, or you don't really know. But when someone stays in your home and you might be buying them groceries, you know what they're eating. And I remember Jay making 3 very neat Tupperware meals and filling in with protein drinks. It wasn't like it is now. It's just gotten too extreme. I think Chris Lund said it best. He said, "Ed, never have there been so many big guys, but never have there been so many big jerks." I can't imagine the guys back then posting these photos with foot-high hamburgers. You can't possibly. In fact, I was quoted in a magazine as saying the guys have become giant shitting machines.
But you have said that. Who used the most toilet paper in your house? Please don't say me. By the way, if it was me.
I don't. But it was a lot. It was ridiculous. You can't possibly utilize that much protein.
Who went through the most toilet paper of all your house guests? Come on.
Well, I can. I can. Well, I can say this. I can say this now because he's dead. But Greg Kovacs was definitely a nightmare. And,
did he clog your toilet?
Well, and his wife or girlfriend at the time had to, go wipe his ass. That's how. Yeah,
I know it. I said it. I'm glad you confirmed that with me.
Well, they say bodybuilders are so muscle bound sometimes they can't even tie their own shoes. Some of them get so big they can't even wipe their own ass. So, luckily I never had that problem.
Kim used to always go to the bathroom with Greg. I knew them personally.
Dave and Arne, do you think the guys back then in the 80s and early 90s, they would have been as obsessed with these selfies? Would they have treated social media the same way?
No.
I think they have to, because you know what, Ed? The problem is that if you don't keep up with social media, you're not making any money. There's no contracts. Kovacs was making 120 grand plus from Muscle Tech every year plus, and that was a lot back then.
More than that.
There's no guys making that kind of money nowadays. If you don't do social media, you can't feed yourself, you know?
Well, granted, but I mean, the pictures just are they're awfully boring.
Yeah, I agree. There's no creativity. There's a couple guys out there that do creative stuff, but I think that's why guys do pictures of food, Ed, because they don't know what to do to get people to click on their profiles, you know? If I put a picture up from the 90s of myself, it gets 10,000 views. If I put up, you know, a picture now, or if I put up a picture of me doing stuff now, it may get, you know, 1,000, you know, 1,500, you know, likes. But let's face it, people want to see big, freaky bodybuilders.
And David, that's a part of okay, so this is a part of what we talked about early on. We didn't really expand on it, but most people, especially guys, they get into bodybuilding when they're younger and they have their insecurities, right?
Yeah.
So for you now, or for me now, if you get a 10,000 when you're all, you know, 290 pounds, or you get 1,500 now when whatever you weigh is, it doesn't really affect you. You know, it's whatever. You know what it is. But if you're in that place where, you know, because a lot of guys, like I had said earlier, they will not get off everything. There are people walking around right now that we all know, and I just see a couple pictures here and there. I mean, come on, I know who's on and who's not just by the way they look. I can tell, David, that you're off, and I mean that in a compliment, but you're off.
Yeah.
Because I know that, look at people, one of the comments that people said about me in the first interview, like, what happened to all his muscle? He looks like he's sick and all this stuff. This is what a 54-year-old man looks like that's not been on drugs for 20 years. I haven't touched a weight except for maybe this past week. But I'm probably 160 pounds. I look normal. People are looking at people that don't look normal, and so many people who are in the industry who, I mean, it is what it is. You know, a person doesn't naturally carry a certain amount of body weight with any kind of shape unless they're on something. And a lot of these folks that make their money from the industry are not willing to do what you're doing and be off because they're afraid that if they lose that 30, 40 pounds, then they look like average Joe,
right.
And then the people that follow them lose interest.
Right.
You know what I mean?
There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure to be the biggest social media, you know, person that you can be. Now, luckily, look, I have a platform, so maybe my ego wouldn't be so fed if I wasn't doing RX Muscle, and that's why I did it, because I want to be able to give back at least all the knowledge I have and just give my opinions. And I'm glad people are still interested in listening to what I have to say, you know, because sometimes that's not the case. But you know, I think that people are hungry for knowledge. And it really is the responsibility of the generations that came before the current generation to educate the new generation, to help them avoid some of the errors that we made, to help them learn the new stuff that's out there, to do things the right way so that they can go beyond what you and I, you know, may have achieved, Arnie, and be better than us. But I think what happens is the pressure to, first of all, fill your ego with what it needs to feel like you're worthy is one thing, because there's no magazines to validate anymore. What's the validation now? Social media. How many followers you got, how many likes you got in a picture, maybe did you get an interview on RX Muscle, but that's your validation. I mean, really, nowadays, if people don't feel validated, they have to do crazy stuff. You know, I think that Rich Piana is a good example of someone who loved the stage, he loved bodybuilding, but he realized, you know what, I'm not going to be Mr. Olympia, so let me come up with my own persona. He was a creative guy, and he created a persona that validated him, right? I mean, he was probably more validated than any Mr. Olympia out there. But at what cost?
Yeah.
Dave,
but here's the thing. At some point, a person has to, they don't have to, but at some point, a person hopefully will make the transition to understand my validation doesn't come from people who really have very little impact on my life.
Very few people come to that realization, Arnie. Very few people. Most people die, unfortunately, before that.
But that's the thing, Dave. People die because they're caught up in the validation of what they think they have to be doing.
Happens all the time.
Instead of doing what they're called to be doing. And just, dude, be a normal person. Be the best person you can be. Forget about all this stuff that you're doing and see where your life goes. My life, like I said, I would never do bodybuilding again. I don't have any regrets. Loved it. Had a blast. I can't go back. But I would never want my kids to do bodybuilding. I mean, why would I? I want my kid to be training so he can eventually end up on drugs when he's 18, 19, 20 years old. You know, it's just like, why? That's my own flesh and blood. And so just like I want for other people.
Someone put $1 million in front of you, Arnie, you wouldn't go and make a comeback?
Never.
For $1 million. How about $5 million?
No amount of money. I would never.
I don't believe you. I think you're lying.
Well, you put $10 million on the table, and it won't matter. You don't have $10 million, and I'm not coming back anyway. Ed
okay? Does. Ed, so, give Arnie $5 million. Let's see if he'll do it.
Right.
So look at, and here's the thing, Dave. I do believe that there's a certain way a person who's a I mean, people throw around the word champion all the time, right? There's different ways to be champions in life, but it comes from a certain way that a person is wired. So depending on what is the space or the industry that they get involved in, that champion mindset still has to kick in.
Right.
Okay? I do believe that when a person has reached a certain level of accomplishment in sports, especially because it's a physical it's a primarily physical achievement, and as you get older, your physical abilities decline. So at some point, a person wants to know to themselves, not to validate with anybody else, to myself, do I still have that in me? And it's not about bodybuilding. It's about the champion that's in all of us, but whether we access it or not, it's up to us. So I believe that there is a comeback for every person like yourself, like me, or Ed, who's reached a certain level, that if the stakes are high enough, they will make a comeback, but it doesn't have to be a comeback in bodybuilding or in boxing. It can be a comeback that will test them, and oftentimes it will test them even harder than they were tested in their original endeavor, because now they're older, the stakes are higher, whatever those stakes are, they're high enough for that person to say, you know what, I got to step back in. And, I mean, the only films I've ever bought for my kids are the Rocky movies. Those are the only ones I've ever bought. Mm-hmm. And that's what that whole thing is based around. Yeah. It's about a person who's in the trenches, their life is really difficult, they dig in their heels, they come back, and then when he's 55, I'm 54, you know, he makes a comeback and everybody tells him he's crazy and this and that. But I believe that there's a comeback, a life comeback for everybody.
Arnie, to kind of counter what you just said, I'm thinking of people like Dave Hawk, whose son became a competitive bodybuilder, I think did well, had some fun with it, and now he's moved on. I think that's great. I don't know that, you know, then we've now got Hunter Labrada, you know, Lee's son. So, I mean, these are interesting stories, and I think their fathers are proud of them for what they did, and I don't know that it's, again, that was their dream when they were young.
Look at Sergio Oliva Jr. His dad didn't want him in bodybuilding. His dad actually tried to blacklist him so that he wouldn't do bodybuilding. And
yeah, that's actually a great example. I mean, I've told him this. His dad was a jerk, but you know, but he's great. He's a good kid and very level-headed and terrific physique. So yeah, I don't think, Arnie, I wouldn't tell your kids don't do this, don't, you know, just encourage them. And I encouraged everybody. I would not be negative, or you know,
right.
I don't believe.
So I do encourage my kids because they're great. My oldest son is Evan. He's 15. He's a so much better athlete than I could have ever been in my lifetime. So I do encourage him. But my kids have never seen a picture of me as a bodybuilder. My boys. Yeah. I don't need them looking at that and thinking that that's what they need to aspire to, is a guy that's, you know, pumped up full of chemicals, and you're not going to look that way, son, unless you're willing to do that.
Frankly, you know, if your kids are being raised Jewish, I think they need to learn to fight.
Oh, well, yeah, we'll see.
I look at, you know, I mean, the Holocaust was an incredible, I mean, the crime against humanity, but my God, why? I mean, my first night without a hot shower, I would have organized a group to go, you know, rush the guards. I mean, it's just, you know, I'm not going to go and live through life like a sheep.
And that's part of the comeback that I'm talking about. So, and Dave, and you know this, because I stepped away from bodybuilding, and I never planned to get back into that. I never planned to I evaporated.
Yeah.
Okay, and what got me back into a conversation that's really not a conversation about bodybuilding even though that's what we're talking. I happened to come across one of your interviews with Dorian Yates.
Right.
And Dorian Yates is going on about how the Holocaust never happened. Yeah. And how with his research, you know, he understands, listen, okay, you can research whatever you want to research on the interview because anybody can write anything on the internet and put it out there. Me, you, and Ed could start writing articles right now that bodybuilding is completely natural. It never had any drugs. It's a wonderful thing. Nobody's ever died from their involvement in bodybuilding, and nobody ever took drugs, including Dorian. He's really misunderstood and everything. But we know that's bullshit.
Yeah.
But we're putting it out there to try to sell some kind of agenda. In the meantime, the bodybuilders are dying and they're hauling them off out the back door.
Yeah.
So I reached out to you because of that conversation about the Holocaust never happening. That's not going to work. That's so far from the truth. And I've sat and talked to many Holocaust survivors. For many years, my wife and I, we used to go to the Friends of the IDF. It's a fundraiser for the IDF, which is the Israeli Defense Fund.
Yeah.
And every year there's the table of the Holocaust survivors, and guess what happens? That table gets less and less and less people, but they have them come up and tell their testimony, a few of them. And the last one I went to, like I said, I'm an emotional person. The last one I went to, Ed and Dave, it was at one of the hotels on Avenue of the Star, and Sylvester Stallone was there, okay? And I used to always get, people thought I was him. I looked like him. It happened to me on my honeymoon. It happened to me at clubs, all this different stuff. And he was there that night, and they had the Holocaust survivors. There was probably 9 or 10 of them. And it was at this fancy hotel, and we're out waiting for our valet. And this guy came up to me, and I wasn't even looking at him. I was looking off somewhere else, and this old man grabbed me by my arm. And I turned around, and it was one of the Holocaust survivors that was sitting at the table. And he said to me, he said, Mr. Stallone, I just want to thank you for all the movies that you've made, how much you inspired me, okay, and how much what you did meant to me and my family. And I sat there, because everybody else who had ever thought I was him, I would always tell them, I'm not who you think I am. And then they would just disappear. But here's this guy, and he looked like Mick in the Rocky movies, and he was crying, and he's on my arm, and I didn't tell him that I wasn't Sylvester. I told him, I said, you know what? You don't even know how much that means to me. You've inspired every generation after you to come. And I let him just have that moment.
Right.
You know, but for people to think that, or to even, it's one thing to think because you're just misinformed and ignorant. But once you know the truth about that kind of stuff, you can't be spreading that. And Dorian knows exactly what he's doing. He's been that way since before he came into bodybuilding. And Ed, I don't know if you want to share your stories. You've had him as a guest house and everything, but as a house guest. But when you live a certain way from the time you're a young man to the time, and now you're spouting it when you're in your mid-50s, you haven't changed. You haven't changed. So that's a concern, and that's the reason I got back into having a conversation with people to help re-educate them. This is part of what I talked to you about. There's a national news story, Reverend James Stern, who was my best friend since 2014, who died recently of bladder cancer, and Mark Wahlberg's company is doing a 6-episode docuseries on his life and how he is, right now there's a court battle going on to take over the National Socialist Movement's website and corporation, because we want to use that website to re-educate people like Dorian and others, so when they go there to get their anti-Semitic and racist stuff, they get re-educated by movies like Schindler's List and all these different things, because people are getting the wrong information.
Ed, what was your experience with Dorian?
Before I talk about Dorian, I'd like to hear what he said. It kind of shocks me, given what I know. But
well, Dorian told me on the show, because he had put up some stuff that the Holocaust didn't happen, and he said, well, you know, the concentration camps, they were country clubs. They had a pool there. They had softball leagues, and there's no evidence to prove that people died there, and they were dying of typhus. It wasn't that no one was exterminated. And I said, Dorian, I have relatives that you know, that survived it. I beg to differ, you know. And so I was surprised that he was still, you know, and then you know what he does? He still sends me videos on, you know, these investigators that, you know, have said that the Holocaust didn't happen, and their own, you know, biased investigations that they've done, you know.
That really shocks me. When I met him, and I took him to meet Joe Weider, and Joe was upset because he had some tattoos on his forearms that were, what was it called back then? White power, or
like skinhead stuff.
Skinhead stuff. Thank you.
Skinhead, I'm sure.
So he went. Dorian went back to England and had them removed, which back in those days, you know, that 20 years ago, whenever that was, or 30, that had to have been incredibly painful. But he did have. But he told me back then he wasn't a skinhead. He wasn't a racist. But I guess maybe he was lying to me because he knew that upset Joe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just to clarify, Ed, you took him to Joe, and Joe was not going to sign him with those tattoos, correct?
Right. In fact, it was one of those painful moments when I was in my office with Dorian, and that was back in the day. I think speakerphones were kind of a novelty, and I had Joe Weider on the speakerphone, and Dorian was in my office, and Joe, he's big, but I can't have those swastikas on, you know, or whatever he said. I mean,
yeah.
Well, Joe was Jewish. Yeah, I don't blame him. You know,
Joe was
not at all.
So yeah, it was. Although he, you know, Joe. I mean, he wasn't. Well, anyway, yeah.
Joe had a fight with Bob Hoffman, who was a real racist, right, back in the day, and he didn't need another. You know,
who was the racist?
Bob Hoffman.
Oh yeah. If you've seen the movie Big, you see that whole scene. Yeah, that was. Yeah, but well, of course, Joe Weider. I mean, he was fighting racism his whole life, pretty much.
So he couldn't have Mr. Olympia representing his brand. I mean, if it was anything related.
Yeah, so here's the thing that's so sad, really, is that you have a guy that the only reason people know who he is because he won the Mr. Olympia, 6 times, and he's a bodybuilder and this and that. And that whole experience for him was created by a Jew. So rather than being grateful and seeing that, he's spewing this anti-Semitic stuff, it's just not okay. And the thing that's really funny is his gym is named Temple Gym, right? Well, okay, anybody that knows anything about the Bible knows there's a lot of conversation about King David's temple and this and that. Well, his gym was on Temple Street in London. The Temple Street was named after King David's temple. So everything about his life screams Judaism. Right. But here he is talking his talk about anti-Semitism. I would really like to get him, you know, another thing I thought was funny is that when you asked him about who do you think is the face of bodybuilding, that's the voice and this and that, well, who did he say? He said Arnold, right?
Right.
Right? And Arnold is Arnold is very pro-Jewish. He's all about fighting anti-Semitism and racism because guess what? He escaped from Austria, and that was in in the 60s after World War II and everything. But there was still that ideology that still was there, and that's part of. I mean,
Arnold's father
wanted out of there.
Arnold's father was drafted. He fought in the Nazi army.
Yeah,
I mean, so it's crazy. I would love to see Dorian and Arnold have a real conversation about that. Bodybuilding aside, let's just have a real heart-to-heart.
Yeah, it's you know that isn't that, I mean, that's one of the reasons why the Jewish concentration camps were never shut down. They kept them there as monuments so that people wouldn't forget, because people like to change history.
Sure, it's the other thing too, David, is that Steven Spielberg started. There's an organization called the Shoah Foundation. Shoah Foundation was an organization that was founded by Steven Spielberg so they could capture the testimonies of these Holocaust survivors, so they could memorialize them and maintain them for in perpetuity, so people would never forget. Well, they now can create a 3-dimensional hologram where they interview a Holocaust survivor for hours and hours in a dome. And they've got cameras from probably 80 or 90 different angles. So they're getting camera angles on this Holocaust survivor from every single angle. And they ask them hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions about their experience and their life and everything. So when they finish, a person can sit with a three-dimensional holographic image of a Holocaust survivor. They can ask them any question they want, and that image will reach back into the cloud, grab all the data for the question, and it will answer them in real time. Wow. And it will also give the three-dimensional holograph it's like you're sitting there with a human being.
That's crazy. Yeah.
And I know that because I met with the people that do the technology. They want to do one of these story files on Reverend Stern.
Right.
So, I mean, this is the thing, you know, and this is why it's so important that people learn history. Like, they really understand history, because there's a danger of repeating some of the evils of history if we don't understand we already had this page.
And history repeats itself all the time. That's the ultimate, dare I say, slogan, history repeats itself. They do comic strips on it, and they show over and over and over again, from Napoleon to Hitler to Mussolini to this one to that one. How do we keep falling back into the same thing? Because
Dave, I was in Vietnam, and we never should have gone into Afghanistan or Iraq, and we didn't learn it all.
Yeah, we did the same mistake there. So, it's interesting.
David, what was the reaction of people to what Dorian was saying? I'm kind of shocked to hear all this.
I had a lot of Jewish people and non-Jewish people contact me, and they were appalled. And what for me is difficult is that Dorian was kind of like an idol of mine, and I don't really have idols in bodybuilding, but I wanted to emulate what he achieved. I think what I respected was his work ethic and how much muscle he had. So he was a guy I emulated. There weren't many others in the entire industry. I liked like Levroni's physique and Wheeler's, but I didn't ever see them as the work ethic I wanted to follow. So Dorian was a guy that I followed. And when I got to interview him, it was a great opportunity for me to actually ask him questions I always had, because Dorian was so unavailable, back in the 90s. And it was tough for me, because I had to ask him this question because no one had brought it up to him. He said it, and he had put it on his Facebook at the time, and it was in the back of my head, and I said, you know what, I got to ask him about this. Maybe it was just some whim, and he didn't really believe it. And I asked him, and he said no. And to this day, he sends me, on WhatsApp, he'll send me links to videos and stuff like that, trying to prove that the Holocaust didn't happen. He doesn't believe that. He thinks that history has been warped and that we've been brainwashed, and that really didn't happen. And that's his belief. And I told him, I said, Dorian, you know what? I respect that that's your belief. I don't agree with it, but I said, if that's what you believe, you're a human being. I respect because he speaks from, whatever his truth system is, that's what it is. I think he was a great bodybuilder. I just don't think. I think that his thinking on this whole subject is warped, and maybe it was skewed by his early childhood and what he's been exposed to. I don't know.
Could be, but his truth system it's fallible because he's on the internet looking. Like I said, you can put anything on the internet.
Well, that's what's scary.
Anything you want, and so if you're grabbing your truth from the internet, you have a problem.
Turn your camera on, Arnie. Your camera went off.
My what?
Your camera's off. Can you turn the camera on?
Oh, sorry. I don't know. Can you hear me? Oh, wait.
We're hearing you fine. Just keep going, though, while you're doing it.
Okay. So, look, the truth is what the truth is, right? But there's a lot of people that don't like the truth. So if it doesn't fit into their agenda, they're going to try to persuade people to believe something that's not true to fit into their agenda. That's just the way it works.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's just what it is, right? So he's relying on something that's not true based on what he sees on a medium that there's some truth in there, but there's a lot of untruth as well.
Well, it resonates with him because obviously it's something that he believes in his heart, whether it is true or not. That's something. So when you want to believe a certain thing and then you find evidence for that thing that you want to believe, you're going to quote that evidence, right? I mean, because let's face it, you want to promote something that you feel is the truth. If I believe that the Earth was flat, and I can go online and find articles to say that the Earth is not round, it's not a sphere, it's actually flat. There are people out there to do this. Then I'm going to quote everything. I'll send you articles from it, and you know what? You'll say this guy's a moron because we're in space. We can see the freaking globe. We see the Earth is round. What is he talking about? Well, he's got a lot of evidence to prove that it's flat. Well, that's not the truth, though. You know, that's why we
So
have
here's the
Holocaust
thing.
survivors who have, you know, validated what happened there, and that's, you know, it just is what it is, and it's a shame that is what it is. But you know, look, you know, that's his belief system. I can't change it. You know, he's still the bodybuilder that he always was. That's just something that you know, I'm going to choose not to agree with him. You know,
Of course, but you touch on an important. Go ahead, Ed.
Well, General Eisenhower's documentation of the concentration camps at the end of the war, I mean, there's no more powerful commentary than that. Yeah. I mean, he, you know, he was filmed. He had the townspeople in those various villages actually have to go through the concentration camps to see it for themselves. And I mean, there's just, I mean, you know, the History Channel or the, you know, here is practically full-time World War II, where you could see all that. It's incredible to me that Dorian could be so oblivious to all that.
Well, maybe I'll ask Dorian to come on with next week, and we could talk to him about it.
But Dave, to talk about again, you know, my biggest disappointment with the internet was that I thought it would be a great resource, you know, but it's so filled with negativity and misinformation and hate. And I in the early days, the bodybuilding websites I went on, I don't go on anymore. But I don't know at what age, you know, gurus came into existence. But my house, I guess, was kind of a guru house, because I would have people would come there and be under the same roof with other people, and they would learn from that. But
right.
In fact, some of the comments, I saw two of the comments where they wanted to know if I had two-way mirrors in my house. And again, this is
crazy.
Probably, I want to kill some of the fake news here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had 4 houses in Venice and ultimately 4 houses in Rancho Mirage. And, you know, they were all 3 bedrooms pretty much. And, you know, in fact, Arne stayed at 2 of my houses were duplex. One of them I owned with Lex Wheeler. Arne stayed in a duplex. I don't even remember Arne staying there. Dave, you were there alone with your girlfriend, yeah. I think, right? So anyway, there were no you know, two-way mirrors, and I usually had 2 or 3 people, and I had 9 bedrooms to fill in 3 or 4 different houses, and I filled them. So
yeah. You were very generous too. Yeah, very
read what you want on the internet, but again, I would tell my house guests, you know, nothing good ever happens after 10 p.m. and come home and behave.
You know,
that's funny because
I see guys on Instagram, and I see them proclaiming their title on Instagram is the #1 or #1 anabolics coach. And people say, what do you think of this guy? He's getting popular on Instagram. I'm like, anyone who proclaims themselves to be the #1 coach on anabolics, you should run for the hills. You don't anoint yourself as the #1 anabolics coach. Other people anoint you as that. As the Bible says, beware of the false prophets, right? You got to just sift through the garbage. There's a lot of garbage on there, and that's why I always try to make RX Muscle that's why we call ourselves the Truth in Bodybuilding. I try to make us a very reputable channel in the sense that the information that we provide is accurate, okay, is safe, and is knowledgeable, and that's what I really pride myself on, because there is a lot of garbage and you don't know what to believe out there. And that's why I started Ed teaching. I have this course I teach 4 times a year called The Secrets to Becoming a Diet Guru. It's a Diet Guru course, basically teaching people the right way and the science of coaching. Because you know what? I was putting down all these other idiots out there, and I said, I'm not doing anything to help the problem. So I started
just do it yourself,
holding the coaching course. Yeah. And people come, I pack the course in every single quarter, and I feel like at least I'm giving back something and making a few dollars in the process. So it's a tough, the internet is great and it's terrible because it's great for marketing, but it's terrible because you don't know what to believe, and you have to just be it's like reading the newspaper, you got to know what to believe and not believe. And unfortunately, there's a lot of National Enquirer type stuff on the internet as opposed to New York Times or Wall Street Journal type stuff.
Sure. So. Ed, let's talk a little bit about, we had, I don't know if you mentioned to David, but one of the things that you and I talked about is that you'd had nearly 700 people stay at your different houses, and 35 of those folks have passed away. And so, it's not an isolated incident. This is something that you had a connection to people who were in a certain lifestyle, and now, I I don't know for sure, but I'm 54, and they probably all were younger than me, and 54 is pretty young to be passing away. So these are people in their 30s, maybe 20s and 40s. So let's speak a little bit about that and how that you think some of that happened.
The majority of those people that I've been able to document that are dead were killed in traffic accidents. Before the opioid epidemic, I think the biggest cause of deaths of white males in America between ages 20 and 30 were traffic accidents. And I don't know any one of them that were involved in a multiple car crash. They all died probably falling asleep at the wheel at night.
Who are you? Can you give us some names, Ed?
Well, Brett Erickson, he was on the U.S. bobsled team. He was driving home at night and ran into the back of a semi.
Wow.
I should have my list in front of me, but no, it was that's the major killer, and that's again normal. I mean, 3 of my house guests have been indicted or in jail for murder, and out of that number, that's actually the U.S. that reflects the U.S. population, the percentage. So I don't know. Again, I really do believe that I can't honestly say after 40 years around this that steroids have killed anybody. I do think synthol and too much GH are deadly. But I think where the recreational drugs come into play are the guys that get off the steroids and then need something to feel good or ease the pain. And that's something that I don't think is talked about enough. That's where the people that have died from Eric Fromm from fentanyl, Matt Duvall probably from synthol, Nasser El Somebody definitely from synthol. I mean, those are the killers that and I see so much synthol these days, and that's scary.
What about heroin, Ed?
Well, Paul DeMeo died from a heroin overdose. He was taking Percocet and couldn't afford it. But again, these are all these painkillers or feel-good drugs that he probably was taking because after the testosterone boost, he needed something to feel good.
Ed, along the same lines of this, I want to just bring up, and you probably know who she was, Jana Rotor. She ran the Gold's Gym in Seattle, Washington there with Tamer. They dated for many years. She just died in an accident crossing the street. She was hit by a car the other day. Died. Crazy.
I didn't hear that.
Crazy.
I see so much crazy driving now with texting. And
she just was walking across the street. She got hit by a car. Can you believe it? Leaving her house. Nuts.
We had 2 die in front of Gold's Gym. That's why I got that traffic sign put up there, bodybuilder crossing.
Yeah, that was great. I love that sign.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
I mean, he died on motorcycles right there at that intersection. Craig Titus totaled his car a block from my house, but wasn't killed. No, it's horrific, the number of people. Most of the guys were people that they were going to be coming out and then got in a horrible accident. That's the role of fate in our lives. I mean, Can you imagine? I had contacted 3 people who were going to be coming out, and they delayed their trip for whatever reason, or I didn't have an extra bedroom,
right?
And they died.
Wow.
I mean,
I'm going to listen to this. I'm going to share a story with you that goes back to survivors and what you're talking about, Ed. When it's your time to go, it's your time to go. But there are certain things you can do to definitely speed up the process. So Etty's dad was a gold medalist in the Maccabi Games as a Greco-Roman wrestler. And in 1972, he had been training on the on the Israeli wrestling team to go to Munich. And he was favored to medal. I mean, he had won the Jewish Olympics. That's what the Maccabi Games are. And he is a kid that from the time he was 2-3 years old in Morocco on the streets could beat anybody with, some certain throw that he did, whatever. So he was favored to medal in the Olympics. And just prior to the Olympics, Etty's mom, who recently passed, she had a very severe reaction to penicillin. So it was the type of reaction to where they didn't know if she was going to live or not. So here's Jack has to decide whether he's going to stay with his wife and be with her, or if he's going to go to the Olympics in Munich and wrestle with the team that he's been on for years and years and years. So he decides to stay home. The whole team goes to Munich, and every single wrestler except one got assassinated.
Wow.
So, right? I mean, talk about God had a plan for him, and then, you know, I have my kids, and it's just, there are certain things that happen that are undeniably, you can't deny unless you're just blind to a lot of things, that God has his hand on our lives, but we can do things and make choices because we all have free will, right? We can choose things or not choose things that will create a better life for ourselves, help us to live longer, even exercise. That's a choice we make to have a better, longer life, to have more use and mobility of our body, so as we get older, we have a better quality of life. That's a choice. Now, if you don't choose that, that's up to you. But when you're 75, 60, 50, and you're falling apart, that's what you chose.
Right.
You know, our choices today are literally what we are tomorrow.
Well, and you make a good point, Arne, is that person, you know, stuffing themselves on fast food, weighing 350 pounds, is he or she any more irresponsible than someone taking steroids?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we all choose, you know, and the role of fate in our lives.
The difference, Ed, is that we know that the fast food and the overweight will kill you with diabetes, heart disease, you know, whatever the case may be. We're not. The data isn't there on the steroids, so I think the person stuffing their face with fast food is probably much more irresponsible in a sense. You know?
Wait a second, because you know what? When your body is a normal body mass, I don't want to put. How much do you weigh right now, Dave?
180 pounds, 185.
185, and how much did you weigh at the most that you could when you off season?
319.
Right. So, and a lot of that was muscle, right?
Most of it, yeah.
So
probably.
it doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter what your body tissue is made up of. It's fat, muscle, whatever. When you have a certain amount of body that's way higher than your normal body mass index, your heart still has to work to push the blood through all that tissue. So it doesn't matter if you're 40% fat or you're 5%.
Well, that's
fat.
not true, because I think muscle is much more functional tissue than fat is, metabolically speaking.
Yeah, but we all know, you guys, that the people on stage that look the best are really the closest ones to dying.
Yeah,
That's
probably.
Yes,
absolutely.
And they've died on, you know, at shows. Andreas Munzer, he was at
Dave and Arne, I'll bet you're going to both live longer because you build up a strong heart at that heavier weight.
Yeah.
And now that you've lost weight, but the problem with most of America is they're putting on weight and they didn't build that strong heart when they were young.
I agree. I agree. Athletic heart is definitely different than a fat person's heart, without a doubt. That's not to say that you or I can't die of a heart attack, because we're part of the national statistics, but I think that if you train and then at a certain point you say to yourself, all right, you know what, I'm going to be 36, I'm going to be 37, maybe it's not so functional to be 300 pounds anymore. I think those are the people that team to make it. You know, Flex Wheeler, you know, his career was cut short by a kidney transplant, but maybe that saved his life, you know, because it forced him to downsize and to stop doing what he was doing, you know. Look at Jean-Pierre Fuchs said tearing his 2 quads was the best thing that ever happened to him. He saved his life. You know, because he probably would have continued to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Maybe he would have had a heart attack and died. So, you know, sometimes you see the writing on the wall, and it's a message for you to go in a different direction. Unfortunately, a lot of people can't change directions because they just don't have it mentally or emotionally in it. Guys, I want to stop us right here.
Emotionally is.
Yeah, I got to stop us because we're running out of time, Arne. But obviously, we're going to continue this conversation. I think a lot of people are enjoying what we're discussing here. These are real topics. These are real stories from back in the day, and I think they have relevance to today because, like you said, Arne, history does repeat itself. So if we can talk about the historical significance of what happened in bodybuilding back in the day, hopefully people won't repeat that same mistakes today.
100%.
All right, so we're going to stop here, guys. Thanks for joining us again. I want to thank Ed Connors for once again taking time out of his busy schedule. Arne List taking a break from his Uber driving over there, and of course, producer Tyler Shore.
Yeah, we're going to get to that on the next one.
Yeah, I know. I'm Dave Palumbo. We'll see you next time.